The next one is toxicity. And this is one of my favorite quotes in a book called The 100-Year Lie. I highly recommend this book. I have it on my shelf if anybody ever wants to borrow it. Over the past 100 years, our species has been engaged in a vast and complicated chemistry experiment. Each and every one of us, along with our children, our parents, and our grandparents, have been a guinea pig in this experiment that uses our bodies, our health, our wealth, and our goodwill to test the proposition that modern science can improve upon the foods and medicines of nature. And it's so true, that's what's going on. We have over 96,000 chemicals that have been released into our environment since World War II, and only 7% of them we have the ability to test. We only have the ability to test for 7% of them. So we don't even know how safe they are or unsafe they are to a certain extent. There's a lot of people out there who think the rise in the global obesity epidemic is a result of toxin exposure. So we can look at the release of toxins into our environment that are these circles all the way up since the 1940s, and then we can see the rise in obesity. This is the rise in obesity over the same time period. Now I think toxins is a part of being overweight and having excess body fat, and one of the reasons why we're getting so heavy. I don't think it's the only reason, but it's a significant one, and here's why. The majority of toxins and drugs are fat soluble, and if the body's exposed to toxins, it responds with either a rise in blood fats or a rise in body fat. The body can store toxins in body fat and they become less harmful. They're much more harmful when they're circulating through the system. So the body says, I want to get rid of these things, at least for the moment, and fat is a semi-safe place to put them for at least a short period of time. But over time, if they stay in those fats, they'll start to cause some DNA damage and eventually become tumors, whether malignant or not, and that's usually how cancer arises, when it's a tumor-style cancer. Leukemias and such might be a little bit different. The obese tend to have an increased toxin concentration compared to lean individuals, and when they decrease body fat, a release in these toxins ends up going into the plasma and circulating tissue, or the remaining tissue. Now that's going to be important because we're going to talk about how it affects thyroid in just a moment. But we know that when you release toxins from body fat, it can disrupt other areas or at least be stored in other areas. And if you're not supporting detoxification proactively, you might be actually doing some harm long term. And you actually can see this in, anybody watch The Biggest Loser? The show The Biggest Loser? So what week or 2 weeks do they typically see a slow, very slow weight loss or a stop in their weight loss altogether? And some people even gain.
I've never watched it religiously.
Okay, I put you on the spot. Week 2 and week 3, they call it the really tough weeks because they lose a tremendous amount of weight in the first week or 2, and they release all of these toxins, and then they start to disrupt other metabolic functions, and thyroid's one of those. Now it's important also, not just in the short term to detoxify while you're losing body fat, but also in the long term. Because this study in obesity research that shows that intentional weight loss, and this was of 5 to 10% of body mass, didn't affect survival rate. People actually didn't live longer when they lost their weight because cancer deaths went up. There's another study shows the exact same thing. A large weight change, both loss and gain, was associated with an increased risk of mortality. People died sooner. The risk of cancer mortality increased in both men and women when weight loss occurred by 5 kilograms or more, which is about 11 pounds or more. So, International Journal of Obesity, we got lots of studies that show it's important to pay attention to detoxification while you're losing body fat, especially if you're going to lose a lot of body fat. I usually say it's 20 pounds or more. So it's one of the reasons why toxicity is a big important aspect and factor to talk about with weight loss. And we're taught as clinical nutritionists, if toxin exposure is the reason for being overweight in a client, well then for long-term success, we have to address that toxin, take care of it. Yes?
When somebody is normal weighted, where do the toxins go?
Still in body fat, also other tissues, because they can be stored in the liver,
So you're just
kidneys.
saying you need to regularly detox?
I think regular detoxification is one of the keys. In fact, I just posted...
Every year?
Once a year, I like once a year, exactly. So I just posted a blog posting last Monday. I'll have another one this coming Monday. And on it was the basics of health. I interviewed Dr. Bob Rakowski, and he goes through what's called the Magnificent Seven. Eat right, think right, drink right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right, every day. Well, he also talks about detoxification and supplementation as two important things to add to those Magnificent Seven. And I put on there and I explained the importance of detoxification, my recommendation of why I think a year detox every year, 28 days, is ideal for most people. So you can go to the blog post and check that out.
Okay.
Here's a video. Has anybody, by the way, questioned the fact that toxins are stored in our tissues? No? And the reason why I asked that question is because I had a client going through a detox program once, and he was out to eat with his friend who's a doctor, who's a medical doctor, and he chose a salad with lots of vegetables on it, and that was it. Was specific on the ingredients, and the doctor said, "What are you doing? Why aren't you getting a steak?" And he's like, "I'm going through a detox program." And the doctor said, "Well, you don't need to do that. Your liver takes care of those toxins. Whatever you're exposed to, your body can handle. You're wasting your time and money." So here is Anderson Cooper in a documentary called Planet in Peril, and I'd highly recommend it.
I don't like going to the doctor, so this is no fun.
Not a big fan of needles.
I'm here for what's called a body burden test. It's not the most pleasant of procedures. It'll take 120 cc's of blood, almost a pint, for scientists to look at traces of 250 industrial chemicals in my body.
Let me just ask you,
Sure.
Have you ever had anyone pass out from giving so much blood?
I haven't had anyone pass out. I've had people get nauseated a little bit. Well, let's get you some orange juice just so that you can fuel up after some sugar.
Public health experts are only beginning to understand what harm, if any, low-level chemical exposure can cause. Dr. Leo Trasande worries most about children.
We're currently in an epidemic of chronic disease among American children. Rates of asthma, childhood cancers, birth defects, and developmental disabilities are all on the rise, and increasingly they're being attributed to chemicals that we're all exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
You really consider it an epidemic?
I do consider it an epidemic.
Rowan and Michaela Holland are some of the first children to sound the alarm.
In the beginning, I wasn't worried at all. I was fascinated.
You made this science class? Is that what you said?
3 years ago, when this video was taken, the entire Holland family decided to get body burden testing for a story in the Oakland Tribune. Their son Rowan was just 18 months old. At the time, he was the youngest child in America to ever be tested for chemical exposure. Michaela was just 5 years old.
I thought that would be really interesting to see, if mom and dad are high in something, would the kids be high in it too?
Their chemical exposure levels were high, but then they got the kids' results, and they were shocked. Rowan and Michaela's levels of chemical exposure were 2, 3, and 4 times that of their parents. For phthalates, also called plasticizers, found in plastic bottles, personal care products, and medical devices. For PCBs, they were used in electrical insulators in refrigerators and microwave ovens and banned in the late 1970s. But one number stood out, Rowan's level of PBDEs, a class of flame retardants found in everything from foam cushions to rugs to mattresses to casings of electronics. They were nearly 7 times the levels of his mom and dad.
He has 2 to 3, or at the time of testing, had 2 to 3 times the level of flame retardant in his body that's been found to cause thyroid dysfunction in lab rats.
PBDEs are neurotoxins. They throw off normal brain function in lab animals. So could they be doing the same to children or adults? The answer is we don't know.
The federal government had never even received any studies looking at the effects of this chemical on human health because the federal government does not require chemical manufacturers to submit this type of data before bringing the chemical to market.
You heard right. The Environmental Protection Agency, which is responsible for chemical regulation, doesn't require manufacturers to test for the effects of new chemicals on human health before getting approved. What's more, the approval process can take as little as 90 days. Compare that to the years it can take for pharmaceutical companies to get new drugs approved.
So a couple things to point out there. One is that the EPA doesn't regulate toxins before they're released in the environment. they're actually what we consider the police officers. There's no prevention aspect, there's no regulation aspect in the EPA. They go out and they find people after the damage has already been done to the environment. Number two is the difference between our federal government and our country is that we require manufacturers and industry and or organizations who are trying to eliminate the toxin or something to prove that it's harmful rather than to prove that it's safe. In other countries, they require that you prove in studies that it's safe before you're able to use it. The cautionary principle. And so we don't have that. We're completely backwards and different from the rest of the Western or the industrialized countries. And so if you're not testing for it, you're not going to find it. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. So these are, if you suspect detoxification or toxicity as a problem, these are tests that you can do that will help to identify if toxicity is a factor for you.